I'm gonna, a little bit of, just a tiny bit of background, because I want to expand this a little bit. I know you're not political, but some departments in the city have basically heads of the essentially not departments, but commissions, like the planning commission, you know, that has staff and commissioners that, in my opinion, listen to the people. They're concerned with equity and transparency, and our departments are that at least I'm personally happy with. There are others that, well, specifically SFMTA, that feels insular. Its commissioners are don't listen to the people, and they're not appointed in the same manner. So bring it back to the financial end. You guys are involved in, you know, the financial transactions across the city. How deep are you allowed into SFMTA's financials, including auditing of the projects, etc.? And is there any changes that should be made such that your jobs are as equally applied to SFMTA as to the rest of the city?
We just had this conversation.
Yeah. So in terms of my role and in terms of kind of the back office reach that we have and the authority and requirements we have under the charter, none of that was impaired by the changes that gave the MTA more space. So I have still all the same authorities, controls, audit, still conduct audits, and still have that level of oversight and responsibility into the MTA's operation. I'll say, and I don't know that I have an opinion on this or the right answer, but it is interesting over a long arc to watch kind of the experiments we've tried with the MTA immunity, right? I mean, Prop E, which was the measure that initially kind of created some space between City Hall and the MTA, was 20 years ago. It was approved in 1999. And the vision of that measure was at the time that City Hall got in the way of certain decisions that were understood needed to be made to make the MTA work better.
Right.
So it kind of created some space and autonomy to let a lot of things that I think most of us would think were reasonably rational decisions happen without bottling up in City Hall. We've changed that and strengthened that space with several voter initiatives between 1999 and today. And now we get into kind of a world where, and I think this is going to be a question that's going to come up this year, is that balance of providing more autonomy so that they can get things done and deliver and not be interfered with by City Hall. How does that balance with the responsibility of oversight, and in particular oversight by elected officials that are elected by most people with a perception that they have some responsibility for delivering transit service in the city? And did we get that balance quite right? I don't know, but I do think it's interesting and very timely to be thinking and talking about these things.
I'll just add to that I think the mayor and the board of supervisors are keenly thinking right now about how does the community run efficiently? How do they run that?
Just a little bit more, please.
How, the mayor and the board, with the announcement of the director of MTA resigning soon, or retiring soon, the mayor and the board of supervisors are actively thinking about who's the next director of MTA, and are thinking about how does the community run efficiently? How do they run their infrastructure projects? How do they, after we just went through labor negotiations, how do we deal with the internal workforce decisions? So there's a lot of thought going into that right now, and we hear it from the residents. Every community meeting is about MTA. The survey that the controller just did was about MTA. So there's a lot of light and a lot of great minds. There's an opportunity right now to let the rest of us and everyone kind of think through and help MTA move into the right direction.
Yeah, Maurice.
My question, I guess, goes primarily to Naomi. We're all aware of the serious affordability crisis in the city, and I was wondering How much progress have you made, number one, in establishing a solid registry of rentals? And number two, a solid registry of vacant or abandoned storefronts that are littering our commercial districts and our commercial streets?
The registry of rentals, I think would be part of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, which is not a department that runs up to me, but I know it is something that we're thinking about. And vacant and abandoned storefronts, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the Department of Building Inspection. As much as everyone thinks everyone reports to me, those are the two departments that don't report up to me. Having said that, I do know that they are actively working on it right now because I've been talking to the director of DBI about, and he's very keenly aware because the Board of Supervisors are hearing about it, and we're thinking about, I mean, it's just as a citizen, so I'll talk about it as a citizen. I drive down these commercial corridors and I see the vacant storefronts, and I know DBI is putting together that registry because the Board of Supervisors, the residents are thinking about it, and I just throw out to you, we need to think through, and this is maybe me as a citizen and not as the city administrator, like we have put all these prescriptive measures in, I'm like, no formula retail, no, and retail is dead across the board. I mean, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but it just feels like, whether it's like, you see it's dying everywhere, whether it's big like Stonestown or, Union Square, like retail is, with Amazon coming along and other stuff, other online shopping, not just Amazon, retail is hard, so we need to rethink that, and I don't know if that is like working with the Chamber of Commerce, working with the Committee on Jobs, working with neighborhood associations. There needs to be some type of like study of like what's the future. And I think we're all learning this together on like what beholds our future and is retail in, and how do we rethink that? I don't know if I have the right answer for that. I don't know the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development would have the right answer for that, but I think we need to get some of the right thought partners around that to think through how do we revitalize these commercial corridors. But I can follow up. Oh, yeah.
Can I ask you that? I think some of the policies we have in terms of designing communities require certain corridors to be active. And I think what we've done is we've created all this throughout the city, and now we're at a point where the environment has changed, where people like to shop online and they don't like the brick and mortar. So the city really needs to just think and think through how do we move forward going from there. Because I know in mission-based shipyard transport, we encounter the same issues where we have certain corridors that are required to be active, and you always have to have an active storefront, and it's repeated in each community. The reality is, can the market absorb all that retail? Is there capacity out there to fill them up? So the city has to rethink and see going forward, how do we not create the same problems, but how do we go back in time and fix some of these retail corridors?
Frank. Sure. My question is for both Ms. Kelly and Mr. Rosenfield. For you, for both of you, when your term ends, what will you hope to have accomplished? And the second question is, what's your biggest challenge and what's the city's biggest risk?
Gosh, okay, that's a lot. I'll start. I don't feel like I have, the city administrator's office has changed, evolved over the years. It was, prior to 1996, it was a very strong office. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was a strong city administrator, a weaker mayor. And then 96, there was charter reform, it became a stronger mayor, weaker city administrator's office, and just and it started with Ed Lee when he was the city administrator, and then we have really professionalized the office to the point where we're now a partner with the mayor and the Board of Supervisors, and have taken on a lot more of just advocating for the different divisions within the city administrator's office. And as such, I've gotten more and more responsibility over the last 7.5 years that I have been the city administrator. The biggest risk in what was the challenges and the...
I think you were biggest challenge and I was biggest risk.
Oh, gosh. My biggest challenges right now is, I think just making sure, and maybe just from the financial standpoint, trying to explain to the voters, we have a lot of change in government with our elected leaders, not, with our board of supervisors and the mayor.
Elected.
I know. But you're not the change, a lot
No, I
of change in
understand.
leadership in the last few years. And the biggest challenge is kind of understanding what we all do from the financial and from the fiscal and the responsibility of the city and what we do. And it may sound bureaucratic at times, but what we all do, I think, is very important to the fiscal health of the city. Because of what we do, we have lower bond ratings. We have higher bond ratings, lower interest rates. We have, because there's trust that we're doing stuff in a framework that's transparent, that we have the trust of the voters. Because we have this process that's fair to everyone in place. I'm trying to explain that when it's very wonky at times. It doesn't fit into a soundbite or hit the next clip. That it's, I think we struggle with that, but yet it's so important because it goes to the fiscal health of our city, where we have like the AAA bond rating, which is really the three of these folks right down here who've got that, and trying to explain that in a soundbite on the news is very hard to do when we have like a $39 billion capital plan and we're trying to close the deficit on, not deficit, but like we're trying to address our deferred backlog so that we get all of our infrastructure into a state of good repair. And people like that because the residents are like, hey, right, I'm hitting these potholes and I've like busted my tire a few times and the park's not working and I need an emergency fire suppression water system in my neighborhood, and that all costs money, right? And so we need to make sure that we hit that, and so I think that's our biggest challenge, which is exciting, but also our risk to make sure that everyone understands how we get there.
I think it's the risk that the smaller or more immediate risk that I spend most of my time thinking about is what will the next recession look like, and is the city prepared for it in a way that we weren't the last two, which we weren't the last two to the level that we should have been or could have been. So that's the thing that will likely happen first. The most significant financial issue the city will face will be the effects of a catastrophic earthquake.
Yeah.
And that will be the recession we can plan for, we can work out of, and we'll get through it. It's just a question of kind of how painful it is. Earthquakes are a really extreme earthquake, and kind of what it would do to the tax base in the city, what would it do to the kind of ongoing population in the city, how the city would plan and recover for that. That's a much more challenging and scarier exercise, I think. The city is doing that, and there is thinking going on along those fronts, given some of the experiences in Katrina and elsewhere. But that's definitely in terms of financial risks, that's the most significant one out there.